Hey there, everybody. What's going on? Peter Fenton here. I am so thrilled to share with you that the Better College Essay is available now on City Limits Publishing, Amazon.com, and anywhere books are sold. So I am speaking in the future tense at the time this episode was recorded, but I am so pleased to share that it is available now. Thank you. Hey there, everybody. What's going on? This is Read, Right, and Wrong, the author chat show at City Limits Publishing, where we discuss everything we've read, what we're writing, and what's wrong with it all. I'm your host, Peter Fenton, and today we are talking all things college admissions essays with Meredith Charlson and Dr. Elizabeth Stone, whose new book, The Better College Essay from Start to Finish, releases on April 29th. Meredith and Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's so great to have you both here. So my favorite question to ask all of our guests to get us started, tell me a little bit about yourself. It's like a job interview.
Meredith, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Meredith Charlson. I am the director of writing at Campanile College Counseling and an instructor for UC Berkeley Extension in their college planning and college admissions and career planning certificate program. And I joined Elizabeth Stone, who is also my mother and also my boss. So we all wear many hats in our family in co-authoring this book. And we've been working on it as our quarantine project for the last 4 months. And I have been gaining experience in writing pedagogy and in helping students with their autobiographical reasoning, which Dr. Stone /mom will refer to a little bit later. And so it's been really great to have this book where we could kind of just, write down and really articulate all of the knowledge that we've been accumulating through our years of working together. And so that's been really great. Yeah. Awesome.
Elizabeth.
Thank you. So I have been doing college admissions counseling for over 21 years. Mm-hmm. My career has gone through many cycles. I started off as a research psychologist at the University of California in San Francisco, was there for many years. And then I taught child and adolescent development at San Jose State University and San Francisco State University in California, and spent 2 years as a visiting scholar in the School of Education at Stanford. And then after that, went into private practice, doing individual work with high school students, and also teaching in the UC Berkeley certificate program in college admissions and career counseling.
Wow.
So Meredith and I train counselors all over the world. We did training I think it was last week, with students from Dubai and Brazil and Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. And it's really exciting now with virtual meetings that we can meet with people who are working with students all over the country. And this is my second book on college essays. Meredith was a contributor to the first book. The second one we co-authored. The first book is The Better College Essay, Fitting In and Standing Out. It was published 7 years ago.
Okay.
A lot's changed in 7 years, so that was time for a new book.
Yeah, the world really has changed. I mean, you talk about video meetings and all that.
We include that a little bit. There's a little bit that we mentioned, like, if you're doing this over Zoom, this is the adjustment that you should be making. And yeah. Good.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have a large base of knowledge and experience that you're drawing from when you're offering this information for people who are coaching students to write their essays.
Right. And I think what makes our book unique is my background as a research psychologist really comes into play in terms of framing what this process is that students are asked to do at this time of their life in late adolescence, what their cognitive abilities are, their reasoning skills are, and how that connects with college essay writing.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's unique about our book too is it's written for mentors. It's not written for students. Students, of course, can read it and learn from it, but our audience is directed to people who are helping students with college essays.
Yeah.
So it's a unique angle.
Yeah, Meredith was telling me a little bit about that before we got on. So how long have the two of you been working together, like with Meredith formally working for Dr. Stone?
So I officially started in 2016, so right after I graduated from college.
Mhm.
Before that, I'm what is referred to as the book as a secret reader. So sometimes when a mentor is, helping students with an essay and, they kind of need a second opinion, they're not quite sure how something is landing, or maybe there's a reference and it's, Dr. Stone and I are different generations and we have different backgrounds. And so just to kind of pass it on to one other person to get that second opinion, she would hand it to a secret reader. And so with confidentiality, all of the identifying information would be removed, the names would be changed, names of high schools or programs or things like that. And then I would offer feedback through in that lens. So I was a secret reader for Dr. Stone basically since I went to college and looking at essays, and then hired officially right after college in 2016.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So why don't we transition into the meat of our interview today? So our first of our 3 segments is recent readings. So, of course, you've written this book on college essays, but I imagine that there are other things that you like to read. So what sorts of genres do you like to read?
That's a great question. I read both fiction and nonfiction, and I've been reading some books on in response to sort of Black Lives Matter and increasing my knowledge of racism in America. I recently read Peggy Walker Kennedy's book, The Broken Road, she's the daughter of George Wallace. I actually had the opportunity to interview her for a webinar that I produced. So that was really terrific, and it was really great to read that. I had recently, right before the pandemic, I had been to Montgomery, Alabama on a tour. So became very interested in that and reading about the history of that area. So that was a recent book that I've read.
Yeah. What was the top line of that book for the listener who doesn't know
Oh, sure.
the history
It's
there?
so Peggy Wallace Kennedy is the daughter of George Wallace, and as an adult, when she had children of her own and trying to explain her father's legacy, I call it, to her own children, she realized that, she needed to reconcile her father's history with her own beliefs. She reached out to John Lewis and the daughter of Martin Luther King, and went on a path of reconciliation and talking about racism and how our country should move forward, speaking out against systemic racism, and sort of, she can't rectify her father's past, but she wanted to make amends in the way that she could. And so that's what the book is about, kind of her journey and, doing it without the support of her own family for the most part. And what she went through, after really kind of understanding as an adult what her father had done. So it's quite a moving book, and it's a really, really interesting story.
Yeah, powerful stuff. Meredith, what do you like to read?
Yeah, I have also been reading a lot of anti-racism books post Black Lives Matter. So I finished How to Be an Anti-Racist by
book.
Kennedy. It was fantastic. I thought it was excellent. And then Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum, who's a psychologist and talks a lot about developing racial ethnic identity and how do you talk to kids about race, how do you help students from marginalized communities develop positive senses of identity when their identity has been historically oppressed. And so that's been really interesting. I'm in the middle of that one right now, and that's been really interesting to read. When I'm not doing that, I'm reading things that are a bit lighter. So I just finished Me Talk Pretty One Day by David Sedaris, which was like an excellent, just funny, light book to read during the pandemic. And then I've also been cooking a lot during the pandemic. And so I'm actually reading through the Smitten Kitchen cookbook by Dick Perelman. That's like my nighttime reading. It's like, I don't want something that's too heavy right before bed. Learning how to make this, rice fritters, that's fantastic. That's right where I need to be. So
rice fritters.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that a favorite dish?
Yeah, it's basically like leftover rice and mix it with broccoli and scallions, egg and cheese, and pan fry it. So it's like little pancakes to make. So
very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's a nice collection of timely things and other books
Yes.
that we're reading.
We ask our students that we work with directly to pick a book for summer reading.
Mhm.
Might be useful in writing college essays. So one of the books that I recently read was Shrill by Lindy West.
Oh yeah.
And that's Meredith knows that book really well too. It's about kind of feminism and women who are overweight, how they're treated in the media.
Yeah.
So it's a really timely and interesting book as well. And I also read Homegoing by Jessie, which takes place in Ghana. It's a really wonderful novel. It's written by a Stanford author.
Very nice. Wasn't Shrill made into a miniseries on TV with A.D. Bryant?
Yeah.
I didn't see it, but I remember seeing ads for it.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to watch it?
I saw the first episode. I saw like how it paralleled ideas and storylines in the book, and then kind of where it took artistic liberties.
Mm-hmm.
I preferred the book personally, but yeah, that's all. I just really loved the Lindy West voice, and I thought that didn't come across quite as clearly in the miniseries. So
sure.
Yeah.
I remember seeing ads for it 1 week of my life, and then I never heard about it again. So I don't think it made that much of a lasting impression on the media landscape, but it's good to know the book was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked about some of the books that you're reading right now, but what about some of your favorite books of all time?
That's a really hard question because so All the Light You Cannot See is a favorite I read.
Yeah.
Really
I actually was just talking with another author about that on an interview earlier today. That's one of her all-time favorite books too.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of another one that I really liked that I read recently. Of course, I have to look up the name because I can never remember the exact title because I always have nicknames for all the books that I'm reading. So I have to remember what A Gentleman in Moscow. That was one of my all-time favorite books.
Yeah. What was the story with that one?
Excuse me. Yes. Oh, that is an amazing. It's about a man who ends up during the Russian Revolution being kind of put on house arrest in a hotel, and he's there for years. And it's kind of interesting when I read it pre-pandemic, but now thinking about it in terms of, and when you think, oh my God, how could you spend years like in building? And that seemed like a really novel idea at the time, no pun intended. But now it's like, oh, I can see how someone could adapt to living that way. It's one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read, and touching and interesting. And I want somebody to make it into a play because I think it would be wonderful on stage.
Oh yeah, really, especially if it's just one setting like that.
Yeah, it's just a really beautiful book.
Mm-hmm. I would say, I mean, I second All the Light We Cannot See. I thought that was amazing. Other favorites are My Name is Asher Lev by Chaim Potok, Less by Andrew Sean Greer. And I also really love Russian literature a lot. I love The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. I love The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. So those are also favorites as well.
Yeah. What do you think it is about Russian literature for you?
I actually thought about it a lot. So I was preparing for the books that I did not enjoy as much segment. And those are mostly British authors. So Jane Austen, Joseph Conrad, Melville. And I think that the main difference is that British authors tend to focus a lot on describing landscapes. And I can't stand reading descriptions of landscapes that go on for pages and pages and pages. And I think because Russia doesn't have this big, beautiful landscape to describe, they focus instead very much on people and describing psychology of characters.
Interesting.
And that's much more interesting for me to read. So that's my theory of why I think that the focus is really different between, British authors and Russian authors of the same time period. But or similar time periods, because Bulgakov wasn't 1800s, but yeah, that's my theory.
That's fascinating. I've never really traced the line of that before, but that's very true about British authors and their landscapes. So what about, so we've talked about some bigger books. Are there any underrated books that you've really liked that more people should know about?
I can think of one. I don't know how much it was underrated, but it was A Strangeness in My Mind by Orhan Pamuk.
Well, I've not heard of it, so tell me about it.
Yeah, so I mean, Orhan Pamuk himself is very famous because he won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and he's a Turkish author. And I think some of his more well-known works are like My Name is Red and The Museum of Innocence. A Strangeness in My Mind, want to say came out in 2015. And I don't think it got a lot of traction, but I thought it was really enjoyable. And I think I appreciated it because the protagonist is just a very nice person.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was so refreshing. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like Les as well. Just like Arthur Les is just such a lovable character that you're following. And, you know, for Orhan Pamuk compared to The Museum of Innocence, where, you know, like the protagonist is, you know, really like obsessed with women and just, you know, is not like, you know, you find him very creepy. And I think in an interview, he said something like, you know, it was kind of inspired by Lolita, of like that, you know, that really creepy pedophilic protagonist. Yeah. And that was, you know, and that's not as enjoyable. And so I really enjoyed A Strangeness in My Mind. I thought that was really enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that like a lot of authors want to be edgy these days and write anti-hero protagonists.
Yeah.
To the point where a protagonist who's a genuinely nice person is refreshing.
Yes.
It's a fun rarity. Yeah. What about you, Elizabeth?
Well, first of all, I'll just say I'm a very slow reader, so I don't read quite as many books as Meredith does in a year. Last year, talking about underrated books, I visited London and I came across a wonderful bookstore called Persephone, which is a bookstore that's devoted to all underrated books. It's books mostly by women written in the early 1900s. And their titles I'd never heard of before and were not you know, marketed widely, particularly in the United States. And it's a bookstore that's a treasure trove of underrated books. So if someone's looking for, you know, finding something that's a little bit unusual, but maybe beautifully written, that's a really great place to look.
Awesome. Sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. So why don't we transition into our next segment, Writing Away. So you have a new book coming out at the end of April. Tell us about it.
So if that's okay, Meredith, I'll just describe it a little bit. So as I said, this is my second book on college essays, and a lot's changed in the 7 years in which I wrote the first book. But the book is a book for people, counselors, parents, teachers, older siblings who help high school students write college admissions essays. And so it's about mentoring. It's a book that explains what a college essay is, what it's used for, and the variety of essays they are. Because I think there's sort of a misconception when people enter this process, there's like one essay students have to write. And actually, Meredith and I categorize them in a lot of different categories. I'll let Meredith go into that a little bit more. And so the writing and what students need to include in essays is different depending on what the purpose of the essay is. The book is based on research that I did when I was a research psychologist at the University of California, San Francisco, where we had developed something called a social cognition interview, which was an interview that was based on cognitive developmental theory, personality research on how people describe themselves and others. And it's a developmental process, the sort of the richness and the nuance in which people are able to talk about others. And so I apply that theory to college essays because it's one of the reasons why it's really challenging for students to write them. I mean, you might think, oh, just writing a 250-word essay, why is that so stressful? Why is that so hard? Why does somebody need help with that? And actually, teenagers need help with that because there's a mismatch between the questions that colleges ask, which require a high level of insight and introspection, and where most adolescents are developmentally, where they haven't developed that level of introspection yet. So you have a question here and you have a student here. And that space is where the stress comes from for students. So I describe what that research is and where adolescents are developmentally, and describe sort of the kinds of essays you might expect from students at levels of development. And then how you work with students to have them be able to reason more about themselves, to be more self-reflective. And we provide a model of dialogue, how you interview a student, to get them to think more introspectively. Because if you just say, oh, provide more insight, or how does that make you feel? You're not going to get anything. You have to be very, very directed in your conversation. It's somewhat like being a therapist, where you really have to ask the right questions in order to get someone to think in a different way. And that's really a lot about what the book is about. We have writing from, I think, over 20 students contributed their writing to the book. So there's lots of sample essays, a real wide variety of students. But I think the title is really important to explain because it's called The Better College Essay, not the best college essay. This isn't about the winning essay or the essay that got somebody into an Ivy League, because most students aren't going to those kinds of schools.
Right.
And it's really not, there is no such thing as the best essay. It's the best essay an individual student can write. So the better essay, the essay that a student can write that's better because they've worked with a mentor. So this is a book that applies to students who are applying to any kind of college. Even if they're a C student, this book is going to be a helpful methodology for someone who's working with them, because it's about getting the student to do their personal best. It's not a comparative, it's not a competition to see who has the best essay. That's not the goal. The goal is to help each student write their own best essay. And so that's what the book is about. So the title is important to kind of put that in a framework.
Wow.
That's it in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, yes.
I'll let Meredith talk a little bit more about the different kinds of essays that we focus on in the book. And then I also want to just add, and we can talk more about that too, is that at the end of the book is a curriculum for writing and teaching students to be self-editors, because that's really an important part of getting students to a better essay, is teaching them how to be able to evaluate their own writing and how to self-edit. So there's a curriculum in the back of the book that takes students through kind of different levels of a self-editing process.
Cool. So Meredith, why don't you tell us a little bit about the different types of essays that students write?
Yeah, absolutely. So we loosely categorize them in the book, referencing the old title, The Better College Essay, Fitting In and Standing Out, into fitting in essays and standing out essays, a super, super loose categorization. But basically the idea is that there are, some essays like, discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that made you learn new things about yourself or others. That's an example. That's a common application. That's a paraphrase of a common application essay prompt. And that the purpose is to stand out. It's to show how you're a unique person and what are your interests and experiences. And then there are fitting in essays, which are like, why are you applying to Lehigh University? And you're really trying to make a case for, you guys have the resources that I need so that I can, achieve my academic or personal goals. And here are all the reasons why we're really a good match. And you're making an argument for that. So those are two different kinds of essays. The fitting in essays are ones that don't require that kind of introspection that the standing out essays do. So a lot of the book does focus on, we have a chapter on fitting in essays, but a lot of the book does focus on, those introspective standing out essays. And then there are also essays that we call, short essays, which are kind of like fun facts. And they can seem very random. So, what's your favorite way to eat a potato is an example of a real life prompt that a college asks students. And, really? What's your theme song? And I mean, we're laughing, but students get so stressed out thinking, oh my God, there's one right way to eat a potato. And I'm like, I promise, like, no one's judging you if you like it mashed, if you like tater tots. I promise there's not like a chart saying like, oh yeah, the Ivy League students get in if they like French fries. but students do get anxious about it. So we
Yeah.
made a section of the book about that. We have a whole section on what we call Quirky Essays, which was inspired by the University of Chicago prompts, because if you've ever seen any of the questions that they ask students, there are prompts like, what can be divided by 0? Respond in 650 words.
Huh.
Yeah.
That is a quirky question.
It is a quirky question. They have questions like write a letter to your roommate. And so those are other essays that maybe could involve some of that introspection, but really I think that they're being asked because the college is trying to test creativity, or, in the case of a roommate essay, Stanford asked that question, and I think Elon University started asking that question. They kind of all, a lot of colleges will maybe see like, oh, this college asked this question one year. Oh, I think that's a good idea. I'm going to use that for my application the next year. So it kind of shifts. Yeah. But sometimes the purpose of those questions are just to kind of see how would you write to a peer? Would you interact with someone that's your own age instead of an admissions committee? Yeah. We talk about artist statements as well, about, students who are applying as actors, who are applying as dancers, visual artists, about, how do you explain your artistic process? Because I'm sure, as an author and a playwright, if someone asks you like, how did you do this? It's like one of the most terrifying questions ever.
Yeah, it always is.
So we talk about that as well. So the chapter on artist statements and the chapter on short and quirky essays are two completely new chapters that we included in this book that were not in the last version of the book. We really ended up, I think, rewriting we thought that we were kind of creating an update of the first book. And as we started writing, the Better College essay from start to finish, we really realized this is a complete rewrite. Yeah. And it's all new, but those chapters are specifically things that were not addressed in that first book.
They were addressed, but not in detail. They were just
not in detail. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
And then the finish part, the start to finish part, is we realize that even after students submit their applications, they're often still not done, because a college will come back and maybe defer their application or put them on a wait list, and then students are asked to write another essay or a letter to the admissions office telling them why they are still interested in that school. So actually, that's the finished part of the process that we included in this book, is what happens. Are you ever going to be done? Quite seriously, because even after you push the button and submit everything, they might come back to you and ask for more. So we've included a lot of examples of questions that are sort of, we call them the after essays. So after you've submitted, that there's more that they may come back and ask you for. So it's a very long process for students to write college essays. It's not uncommon for a student to write 30 different unique essays to apply to 10 colleges. And so there's months and months of writing that students have to do. So we start, explaining from the very beginning, how do you brainstorm topics with students? How do you decide what's the right topic to write on? How are you going to build the narrative? And then what's the process of revising and redrafting, incorporating feedback, and what that process looks like. And
I should say our phrase, and I should also just mention that our phrase is edit without a pen, because it has to be from the student, and it has to be their words and their writing. And so a challenge that, we've been doing this for a while, so it feels kind of second nature at this point. But I know in a lot of trainings that we do, a lot of questions that we get are, how do you give feedback and have it be not too intrusive? So, there's one end where things end up being rewritten. It's not really about the genuine student. It's not really about the student's genuine experience anymore. Maybe the feedback is being given because, oh, well, if you say it this way, it'll make you look better, whatever look better means. Or it's, feedback that's very, very vague. So it's saying, like Dr. Stone was referring to, like, provide more insight here. And students are like, I have no idea how to do that.
No one does.
And no one does. So it's really, how do you kind of inform the students of what they need to do, but then hand it back to them and say, here, now you go off and do this work.
Yeah. So, it's like, how do you communicate that this is the opportunity and lay out what that opportunity is?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So edit without a pen is the process with which we ask a lot of questions. So it's sort of the edit without a pen. It's like, don't can't off the paper, but give a lot of feedback, a lot of questions, so that you can help the student think about how to revise that essay on their own,
Mm-hmm.
without you touching it and
Mm-hmm.
rewriting it for them.
Yeah.
What?
Without rewriting it for them.
Rewriting it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm really curious about this way that you get mentors to get their adolescents to develop introspection tools. Can you go into that a little bit for me?
Sure. Yeah. Or do you want, we practiced a modeling of it when we were teaching our last class at Berkeley. Do you want to do you want to do the modeling?
Oh, I don't think we should model it, though, Meredith. I think we're better off explaining it.
Sure.
All right.
Whatever you want to do.
I think so.
There are no rules here.
Okay.
So, well, I can say that, when we're talking to students, like in terms of just kind of starting with the brainstorming, if students come in wanting to write about a particular topic, usually we respect that and we start our conversation there, where the student is interested in beginning. And so we ask very specific questions. So someone might say, I'm interested in talking about choir. And it's like, okay, awesome. So tell me a little bit about choir. How often, what choir are you involved in? What's the name of it? How many hours a week do you spend doing choir? What section are you in? What kind of music do you listen to? And then when there's, a response that triggers a curiosity. So, in the way that we model it, I know that we're not modeling it, but in the way that we do for our classes.
I'll ask you the question.
All right.
When we model it. I asked Meredith pretends to be a student who's in choir, and she's told me about how many hours she rehearses and what kinds of music she sings, and she's a soprano. And then I say, have you ever gotten a solo?
And I say, no, I haven't. I auditioned for one once and didn't get it.
Yeah.
Really? Well, why did you think you didn't get the solo? Is there a lot
no, actually, I'm just a really very bad singer, and there were other people who have better voices than me, and that's why other people deserve that solo.
I'm like, that's an interesting story. Now I'd like to know why you spend all this time in choir practice, and it's something you're not good at, and you're good at. So I think there's a story there. So that's the one that I'm like, that's really interesting. That's what I'd like to know more about. Tell me more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you spending all this time doing an activity that, you could be doing something else that you might be better about? Well, what is it about being part of this choir that's so important to you that you do it, even though, it's not someplace where you really shine? And that's how we start to draw a story. So it's through this conversation. And one thing that we don't do is we don't instruct students to outline their essays. We want a narrative to develop organically, and you never know. And as a writer, I know you know this. You never know where a story is going to go until you actually start writing it. And so we don't make students, commit to a beginning, middle, and end, because we know that the students, when they start writing, they don't know what their end is going to be. Mm-hmm. We want to see what comes naturally to them. So it's a very open-ended process, and then we continue to refine it with more questions.
Yeah.
And I should also add that, knowing that students generally struggle to kind of reach a level of self-reflection that involves psychological insight. And, and by psychological insight, what that means is, like, maybe in our conversation about the fact that I'm in choir, but I'm a really terrible singer. And then the question is, why are you in choir if you're a terrible singer? I might give a response like, well, I'm really smart and I'm really good in my other classes. And usually I'm the person who, people ask for support. And it's actually really comforting to be in a space where I don't have to be the person on my A game, and I can just let other people be really great and talented. And that's really relaxing. So that's something that has more insight into it. And sometimes students won't be able to get there because, we're only working with them for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
But what we are really interested in is figuring out a narrative that allows us to draw inferences about the student, even if they can't articulate that. So even if the conversation stopped at, I really love choir, but I'm not very good at it, but I spend all my time doing it, we might have inferences like, okay, like this is someone who really doesn't need to be the best at everything that she does. Maybe we learned through our conversation that, one of the reasons why I really like choir is because I really value the friendships that I have there. And, friendships and the social aspect is valued more to me than being the best in the room. And that's something that we learn about my character. And so that's what we're trying to get at with students as well. There's a lot that can be revealed in the narratives that they tell and in the language that they use about who they are as students. And by asking them really specific questions, and one of the other ways that we do that is by asking for more and more clarity in their language.
Yeah.
So one of our terms are penny and nickel words. So words that don't really have very much value. So, penny words are, good, bad, things, places, the words that don't really mean anything. But one of the examples that is in the book of what I would call a nickel word is there was a student who wrote about being an audience member and watching plays at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And she was talking about seeing a production of Romeo and Juliet, and she described the costumes as being simple. And I highlighted simple, and I'm like, well, simple means a lot of things. To me, simple means like, kind of not ornamented, like very like kind of clean cut. Yeah. And when I asked her about it, I said, what does simple mean? She said, oh, well, it means that it was really neutral colors. And then that was another conversation. It's like, well, if they're really neutral colors, why do you think that that was a choice the director made? She said, well, bright colors, I guess, are, and her insight was that bright colors are aligned with, with nationalism and with certain cultures. And if you have really neutral colors, it's kind of like everyone is equal and everyone's kind of on an even playing field. Yeah. And she thought that that was the emphasis. And so that made its way into the essay because I don't want to say challenged exactly, but I questioned the word choice and asked for more clarification. And so that's another way that the editing without a pen process works. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can tell that through this process of dialogue and questioning, there's a lot of redrafting because the students will come back with more questions. So some of this would be in terms of like a face-to-face dialogue, and some of it would be in notes that we write back to them.
Yeah, it sounds like a really interesting collaborative process.
It's really interesting. It is. And students really grow in the process. And that's what's really exciting, that over a course of, working with a student for 3 or 4 months, that they really become a much better writer in the process.
Yeah. I wish I had this service when I was applying for colleges 8-9 years ago. Yeah. Cool. So is there anything else you want to say on the book before we transition into our next segment? Are you working on a new one?
Not yet.
I think that we're done for the moment. I mean,
this is a big project, and it's also, we're curating essays from our students, and that's part of the process too. Is finding examples that help illustrate what the process is. So we spent a lot of time going through hundreds and hundreds of essays, and
the old drafts, and
we're portrayed a variety of different kinds of students in terms of their interests, their backgrounds, the topics that they write about. And one thing that we found, that's really different in the 7 years since the last book came out is what students write about is very different now than they wrote about 7 years ago.
What's changed?
School shootings.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter, climate change. I mean, these are things that are on people's minds.
We have an essay. Oh, I was going to say that there's an essay about voter suppression. There's an essay about homophobia. Yeah. I would say, and definitely in terms of writing about social justice, that has just really become a very, it's weird to say it's a common topic, and social justice issues are so, there's such a wide range of issues under that umbrella term. 7 years ago, I remember some of the essays that were included in the book had to do with, LGBTQ rights, and gay marriage was very much kind of the hot topic of the day. Yeah. And so that's really changed. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that were in the book before about some of the topics. I know that there was a Holocaust remembrance essay in the first book.
It's just,
it's different.
Students are still going to write about sort of common teenage experiences, but when they are writing on a topic or a college asks a specific question related to, what impact have you made on your community? Those are that's kind of where those topics sort of come up. So that's changed a lot. And, I think, there was an essay that was added this year where students were invited to write about their experience with dealing with COVID-19.
Mhm.
So that's a
Sure.
whole new essay that's
Yeah.
due this year. So we have that included in the book as well.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Yeah, the world really has changed in the last 10 years. I definitely think that, especially in the wake of the Parkland shooting, when we saw those teenagers begin speaking up and speaking up about gun rights, gun safety, I should say. Yeah, it's a really civically engaged generation that's rising up and writing their college essays now. So
Yeah, so one thing that's really interesting about college essays, it is just sort of this window in time where you get to learn about what teenagers are thinking about. Depression is something a lot of kids are experiencing, and mental health issues. We do include that in the book as well.
Yeah.
Especially during COVID, there's been a increase in mental health crises amongst teenagers. That was addressed in the prior book as well, but I mean, that is something that we do talk about in the book also, is how much do you disclose in a college essay about your mental health challenges, and how to do it in an effective manner.
yeah, because there's a way to overshare really
That's
easily.
correct. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we talk about that as well.
Yeah.
Well, sounds like a really interesting book. I can't wait for all the education professionals to pick it up.
I'm really
Thank
excited
you.
about it. We're really excited about it. We really think it's going to be a great resource for people.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to our final segment, all the wrongs. So we can go a number of different ways on this topic. We can talk about books that you've read that you didn't like, or we could talk about your own writing process. I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of places along the way, even in a book that is very successful, that things have gone wrong. So what are we feeling like talking about right now?
Well, I think it was interesting for us to work together on a book. I wrote the last book on my own. Meredith joined me on this book. We initially kind of divided up the chapters, and you write this and I'll write this. And then we realized kind of after we had done that we really needed to make the book sound as it was one voice.
Yeah.
And fortunately our writing styles are not not really dissimilar, but just to make sure that we really both had our knowledge and had input on every part of the book together.
Yeah.
So while we each kind of took ownership of different sections, we ultimately ended up collaborating on the entire book.
Yeah. I can say one section where I think that collaboration was really important is when Dr. Stone was talking a bit about her research and that psychological framework.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm very much a person who, like a mentor who's reading it, who is not a psychologist, and there are terms that I'm not familiar with. And so that was, I think, a really helpful piece of feedback of like, okay, if a layperson is reading this, what will they be able to understand?
Right.
And at first, it was kind of written like a dissertation. So I think that was helpful to make it, to really break it down and use really concrete examples of like, you know, because the social cognition interview describes the levels of person conceptualization and what kind of those responses look like. And so we were able to kind of ask each other, and I was like, okay, so if you were at a level 1, what would you say? Okay, this is, you know, you describe yourself in very objective terms. You'd say, I'm a girl, I'm from San Francisco, I have brown eyes. And so we were able to kind of include those types of examples in the book, so it would be easier for someone to follow. So.
I think the other thing too is that we taught most of the book as we were writing it or before we were writing it. So Meredith and I did a lot of workshops over the summer for college counselors where we tested out the concepts that we had, and we did that as recently as 2 weeks ago, and even made some revisions really recently based on questions that students have. So when we're presenting material and someone doesn't understand it, or they're like, what about this? You know, then it gives us immediate feedback, because our goal is to communicate our process to people who are going to be helping students. And if we're not clear, then we're not helping anybody. So I think our process of you know, writing, teaching, revising is really helpful for this particular type of book, because we want to make sure that it's clear and that the examples that we give are crystal clear to people. They're not ambiguous. It's, you know, so I think teaching is really integral part of what Meredith and I do.
Mhm.
And the process for me as in my former life as a college professor, to be able to kind of test out our curriculum before we publish it is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to hear after you publish it, but people, it's like a recipe. You don't want
Right.
to, you want to test your recipe before you have somebody make your chocolate cake and find
Yeah.
out the temperature wrong, or people can't follow the directions. So that's
Mhm.
a really important part of our book, and that's a very important part of our process that we've been doing over the last year is teaching parts of this and making those revisions.
Yeah. And I can provide a more specific example too. I think
Sure.
one of the ideas in the book that, we kind of knew instinctively from our practice was the presence of implicit bias in college admissions.
Mhm.
Because one of the goals that we describe, to counselors that we're training or to parents that we're having conversations with, or in students as well, is that, part of the college essay, like, a job interview is creating a positive first impression.
Mhm.
But what does that mean? And, sometimes being exactly as you are in your wonderful, authentic self, for whatever baggage a person is bringing in, something isn't good. There's going to be some misalignment, and it's not the fault of the student.
Yeah.
And so from a conversation that we had in a workshop, a participant asked about that, of like, how much of this is on the student to create that impression, and, where's the split? And so from that conversation, we realized that it was really important that we added that in the book, that we made sure that we were really explicit about saying, there is a layer to this that is outside of the student and the mentor's control.
Mhm.
Just know that exists. But then again, there's a lot that is in the student's control, because adding more context to a story and adding more specific details prevents people from making assumptions about you that may or may not be true, because there isn't enough information to know better. And then that's kind of giving them a little window to say, I'm going to put in my assumption and my baggage and my life experience in this, open window that is left for me.
Sure.
And so that's some of the work that we do with students. And whenever we have questions for them as readers, that's something that we know, students need to explain. And then there are also times when this is maybe a ramble, but there are times when maybe too much context is also not the better solution. And so how do you make that judgment as a mentor? So
Yeah. Oh, that's really good stuff. And it does seem like a huge benefit to the kind of book that you're writing is that you do test it out as you go, and you get that immediate feedback on this is landing, this is not landing. That, a lot of guests on this show just don't have, because they're not, teaching chapters of a novel to groups of people.
And that same goes through with the curriculum that we've developed also. The curriculum's we've been using it and refining it over the last 3 years or so. So we know that students are able to do it and are willing to do it, because you can't just throw stuff out at teenagers and make assumptions that they'll engage with it. But the curriculum is short and easy and to the point, and teenagers will do it. So that's something that we also believe is going to be really helpful to people who are working with students and the students themselves.
Yeah,
definitely. Well, Meredith, Dr. Stone, it has been wonderful talking with you today. Really a pleasure. I'm so excited to see your book released this spring, and I can't wait for everyone to read it. You can get your copy of The Better College Essay from start to finish on citylimitspublishing.com, amazon.com, really any of the major online retailers of books. Thank you so much to you both. Any final thoughts for our listeners? Where can we follow your work online?
Oh boy, that's a good question. So nowhere at the moment, but hopefully we will have something that you can follow our work online. But we do occasional workshops. So we do. People can email us or contact us. We're happy to let them know when we have upcoming workshops. Usually they're 2 hours long, and people can sign up. They can also find us through UC Berkeley Extension. When we teach courses there, that's another way of finding us if they'd like to be involved with in-person training. We're also happy to speak with high school groups and parent groups on what our process is and how they can best support their students. So we will hopefully be doing a lot of connecting with mentors and potential mentors in the coming year in that way as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
Just thank you for taking the time to talk with us about our process. This is the first time that we've both been interviewed about the book and have gotten to have a discussion about it to people other than those we live with. And I think that
we're really tired of hearing us talk about the book. So
yeah, because in quarantine, there's no
nowhere else no one else to talk to.
There's no one else to talk to. So so this has been really wonderful getting to speak about it here. And thank you for interviewing us.
Yeah, absolutely. For being the first time that the two of you have talked about this with an outside party, I think you guys both nailed it. So way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also just want to mention, just really give me 10 more seconds.
Yeah.
We know that not everyone has access to professional counselors who can help them and support them in the college application process. It's really important for us to be able to disseminate our years of experience to people who work in community-based organizations with students, who are volunteers, and who have more. We want to give them the tools to be able to support those students who don't have supports at their schools or elsewhere in their community. So outreach is really, really important to us, and we hope that people in Boys and Girls Clubs and Questbridge programs and other programs that support underrepresented students or students in low resource areas, that they'll take advantage of our experience through this book so they can support their students.
Awesome. I love to hear that. Thank you all for listening today. I'm Peter Fenton, and this is Read, Right, and Wrong. What are you still doing listening to this episode? Hit pause, head over to citylimitspublishing.com, and find your next book. I'm your host, Peter Fenton. You can find me online at bypeterfenton.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at peterfent. Have a great day, everyone.